Okay, I guess at this point it is 1:03 p.m. and it looks like Maria started sharing her screen. We're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order and welcome everyone here. Maria, if you can move on to the next slide, we can cover.
Or one moment, just had.
Okay. Oh. I'm gonna go back to the gallery. Okay.
You see the slide, or are you seeing?
We're seeing the slide.
The slide plus the notes.
Yes. Yeah, it's not in full presentation. Let's see.
Hold on, let me see if I can fix that. Just a second.
Okay.
How about that one?
There we are. Okay. We are calling to order the task force meeting for today, August 29, 2022, for the Cannabis Ordinance Task Force. Today's agenda includes our welcome, which is happening right now. We're going to do a roll call of task force members. We will then have a review of minutes from the previous meeting on August 15th. We will then review a draft vision statement that was discussed at the August 15th meeting. We can take recommendations on that. We won't be deciding upon it today. Yeah, we can cover that. We're going to review it and take suggestions because we did not have a draft last time. Then we will go on to a presentation of issues and comments from the cannabis workshops that were held in June. There were 2 workshops held under Director Mary Darby, and we're going to review those comments. We're also going to touch upon the comments from the May 24th Board of Supervisor meeting. The comments from the workshops are kind of expanded upon those initial comments. So the idea of reviewing all of these issues and concerns that were brought up in the comments, it's not to analyze them or critique them. I just want to make sure all the task force members are aware of the things that the community is concerned with, as well as what the cannabis industry is concerned with. It'll kind of plant the seed and get everyone thinking and incubating some of these ideas as we move forward and draft the ordinance and make decisions. Then we have Patrick Sullivan here. He's going to cover a bit on how cannabis taxes work here in Lake County. Just a brief overview to get an idea. And then we will open it up to public comments. Okay, next slide. Okay, a roll call of task force members. So I'm going to go ahead and call out for those who are in attendance. First, William Weiss, our representative from North Lake County. Looks like William Weiss is not with us. Next, Jen, you're pronouncing, okay, how do you pronounce that last name?
Coppinger.
Coppinger. Okay, Jan Coppinger is here. Catherine Vanderwall, our Agricultural Commissioner. She had emailed me that she had a scheduling conflict with another meeting, but she would be attending. She just might be a bit late. Next, we have Rebecca Harper, our representative from the Farm Bureau. I'm not hearing anything from Rebecca in the Zoom room. Next, we have Jennifer Smith, the president of the LCCA.
I'm here online.
Okay, we have Jennifer here. Next, we have Nara Dalbaca, correct me if I'm mispronouncing that as well, our cannabis industry representative.
You got it. You got it right.
Okay.
Just looks complicated.
Okay.
Thanks.
And next we have Robert Geary, our tribal representative.
Here.
Okay. That concludes our roll call. We can now move on to the review of the minutes from the August 15th, 2022 task force meeting. Let's see, we do have, how many task force members were there? Let's see, we've got Jan and Jen and Robert and Rebecca. So we do have the majority of our task force meeting. Is there any issues? We'd sent out the minutes to our members ahead of time. Did everyone have a chance to review those minutes? I guess Nara looks like she's muting or unmuting.
Yeah, I was unmuting. I was just going to say, yeah, had a chance to review them.
Okay. Jen, did you have a chance to review them?
I did. Thank you.
Okay,
Drew, when you're opening it up for public input, we have a
Mhm.
raised hand from Betsy.
okay, Betsy. Yes, would you like to speak?
I have a question. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Yes, I've reviewed all of the documents that you sent, Mr. Amelung, and I appreciate that very much.
Sure.
I do not see the document that was provided by Chuck Lamb and Holly Harris in February, which is a 5-page list of questions and comments that I think should be.
Yes, Betsy, it's 6 pages. I just spoke with Holly Harris, and when we get to that section on the agenda, we can address that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so,
I'll move to approve the minutes.
okay. Robert, you want to second that
I'll
motion?
second it.
Okay. For all of those who are in favor of approving the minutes from the August 15, 2022 task force meeting,
Aye.
all right, and the task force minutes are approved. Let's go ahead and move on to the next item. Okay, this is a review of the draft vision statement. I created this draft based on the input from the August 15th meeting. I will go ahead and read it out loud for everyone. The County of Lake Cannabis Program is dedicated to the pursuit of a sustainable, vertically integrated, and diverse cannabis industry while balancing the needs and preservation of the unique ecological and botanical environment of the county, the existing agricultural establishments, and the communities and cultural resources of the county. Together, we can succeed with clearer guidelines and expectations of the known and unknown challenges we face both now and in the future. With that in mind, we've had that sent out. I can open it up for discussion if there's anything that anyone would like to add. I would like to ask the public out there if we can I guess limit this at this point to task force members and their input on the vision statement. And we will not be making a motion on this vision statement at this meeting. So when we get to the end and we open up for public comments, we can also, take suggestions on what could be added or taken out or changed. Are there any comments on the vision statement?
I actually have a comment. I'd like to see, as far as for the preservation of unique ecological, if we can put either historical, I'd like to see historical and prehistorical.
Okay. So suggestion to add historical and prehistorical. So we're adding historical and prehistorical resources to the preservation section of the vision statement.
Then Nora has her hand raised.
All right, Nora.
I do, and I don't have a specific edit, but more just something I'd love to see. Either like the word successful or thriving or something like that put in there for the cannabis industry, because we do want it to be successful. I like the vertically integrated because I think that is something that we're looking to expand on in the county in ways that fit within this this nice vision statement. So I don't know if when we're talking about sort of increasing that cannabis tourism and then also the jobs that cannabis creates tend to be really well-paying jobs. So I'd love to see something about economic, the economic or prosperity or success or something like that, along with these other goals.
Okay, that sounds great. So
We put
Yeah,
thriving
that
in front of
comment.
sustainable.
yeah, we have sustainable. We could simply go something like a successful, sustainable, vertically integrated, diverse, and thriving cannabis industry. And then we can incorporate the economic prosperity. I guess with the diverse and the vertically integrated was kind of where maybe the tourism could fit into that. But we can.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And I, don't have to do all three. It's just I do want to acknowledge the jobs that, that it's bringing in, and the fact that we do hope that these businesses are successful. And they are, they're, winning awards. So that's pretty cool too.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great, because that is part of the goal here. So, let's see, any other comments? Jen, do you have any comments? Also, William Weiss, you go by Will, right?
Will, please.
Will has just showed up, for those of you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm late.
That's all right. So going back, Jen, did you have any comments? Okay, well, I'm not sure if Jen is out there hearing, but we do not have any response from Jennifer Smith at the moment. Will, I'm not sure if you had a chance to review the draft vision statement.
I had. So I like that I was pleased to see that it sort of reflects the necessity for like coexistence in the long term. I think some of the things I'd said about wanting it to be broad strokesy enough to actually apply long term. I mean, it doesn't have to be spelled out in the vision statement, but is I think sort of there in spirit anyway.
Okay.
I
think if I remember correctly, one of the terms you used was robust.
Sure, and it's 6 lines long.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I tried to keep it to 2 sentences, and that is kind of in the second sentence, which may be easy to overlook, but I think it's something to really consider as far as clear guidelines and expectations of the and unknown challenges that we both face now and in the future. Because one of the issues we see a lot with ordinances is they can't anticipate everything. I mean, you can make a plan for the future, it may look great, you may set rules and guidelines, but then life happens. Oh, here's Jennifer. So, so I think it's an important element that we try to be as forward-thinking and try to design a robust and resilient ordinance that can handle some of these issues as they come. So, with that said, and Jennifer, I think I was calling for your opinion.
As I was going through security.
So, did you have a chance to review it?
I did. I'm happy with it. I'm glad it acknowledges the community as a whole.
Okay, great. And you heard Nara's comments?
About, yes, driving.
Okay, cool. So, let's see, is there any other comments from any task force members? Jen, you're okay with it?
I'm good with it.
Okay. I guess at this point, we will have our broad public comments section. Is there anyone in the Zoom room attending who would like to make any comments or suggestions?
No hands raised. Oh, wait, there we go. Betsy.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, my concern is the environmental part there, preservation of the unique ecological and botanical environment. What I have seen so far in the previous years is the inability of the county to prevent the damage to the ecosystem. I don't see anything in here about enforcement or managing under CEQA or anything like that. I feel strongly that we should have some sort of a compliance process. I don't know how you'd refer to that, but
no, I think you're absolutely right, Betsy. I think that's going to come into like the nitty-gritty details of the ordinance itself. This is the vision statement is kind of serving as like a substitute for a general plan, whereas planners, when we look at ordinances and review projects, a lot of times, the regulations can be black and white, but then in reality, you're looking at a project and you may hit some gray areas. Well, that's when from, development review, we go back to the general plan and to the area plans. As we move forward and, go step by step, issue by issue, and draft out, the rules and regulations regarding all of those issues, if we ever hit an area where we're not, we're kind of disagreeing or we're unclear as to what direction we would take, we could go back, when we start looking at who's going to review this. Is it going to be code enforcement? Who's going to go out and check these things? That's when as we debate issues such as that, we can go back to the vision statement to where we can see that there's a clause in there balancing the needs and preservations of the unique ecological and botanical environment. So we have that clearly written. If you want to expand upon that, if we're not including anything, I think now's the time to kind of make those suggestions.
I'll wait to see the details unfold. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Betsy.
I mean, I think on a related note, I think anyone watching this or participating in this conversation wants to create laws or a local law anyway that will result in a compliant industry, just as any governing body I think would intend to. That I think is implied in the fact that we're even sitting here doing this, but like I don't mean to sort of thwart what was just said. I think legally compliant or something like that would apply, except that it's like kind of implicit in the fact that we're even writing a law, right? So anyway, that's
to some extent, but you know,
I mean, we might be able to achieve that through licensed instead of compliant, because then it makes very clear that the county is talking about just
okay,
if that's
the licensed or legal industry instead of
that is a good.
After the word diverse, maybe.
yeah,
causes
that's
harm.
exactly, sure. Yeah, I mean, if that pleases the folks who would.
Yeah, Betsy, what do you think about that suggestion?
I appreciate it very much.
Okay, so we have three options for a word. We could do compliant, which, in that sense kind of encompasses both licenses and permitting, because those are two separate aspects. I mean, very similar, one's at the state level, one's at the local level. Oh, and we have Rebecca joining us now as well.
Hi, sorry,
hello, Rebecca. Guys. That's all right. So I guess I can open that up. Out of the three words, compliant, licensed, or permitted, is there any preference to one? I kind of like compliant, but this is up to you guys. So. Any?
I prefer licensed because it implies once you're licensed that you're also locally permitted.
Okay, that's true, yeah.
And I'm looking at other synonyms.
Okay.
It could even include licensed and compliant.
Well,
We could, we're trying to maybe keep it to one. It's getting to be kind of a run-on sentence.
Are we gonna attack the grammatical issues of this?
Yeah. Legal, I mean.
Legal.
I don't know, if you're trying to figure out something that covers everything, maybe that can
Okay,
cover.
Well, just because something licensed doesn't mean it's always compliant.
that's true too.
That's the thing.
Yeah, that's kind of why I had compliant in mind, because you need to have compliance with your state licenses, compliant with your local permits, compliant and legal. It kind of is a little bit broader.
If
It's
you're
zoomed out.
complying, it assumes that you're permitted, licensed, all of those things.
I think that's sort of what I was getting at a second ago. But,
Okay.
but I don't know, if it pleases the group, certainly adding a term is fine.
Okay, great. And Rebecca, since you're just joining us, did you have a chance to review the
Yes.
vision statement?
Yes.
We opened it up to task force member suggestions before moving on to suggestions from the public, but since you're just now arriving, do you have any comments or suggestions?
Not anything major now.
Okay. Does anyone in the Zoom room have any further input for the compliant, licensed, permitted, or legal?
We do have a phone number with its hand raised,
Okay.
in 6205. Need to hit *6 to unmute.
Hi, thank you for recognizing me. This is Bart Levinson. We've just had thunder and lightning over here on Mount Canocti, so I'm afraid I'm completely distracted, and so I will remain quiet at this moment.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bart. Okay. So to summarize, we are going to add some language that covers historical and prehistorical resources to the preservation section. We are going to incorporate some level of successful and thriving elements to the cannabis industry when we describe it, that also can incorporate tourism and economic development and job creation. And then we are going to also incorporate a compliance level to the statement. So we will come back with a follow-up draft next meeting, and we'll be making a motion. Sorry, Rebecca.
I did have one little question.
Okay.
It's not something that necessarily should be changed. I was just curious about the usage of vertically integrated. Is that something that the cannabis industry is working towards? Because
Yes.
that verbiage means that it's a self-contained process, you know.
So we have all the licenses available at the state level to be fully vertically integrated. They're not all currently available in Lake County, and I think that's part of the mission.
So that is something that the industry is working towards. That was my only question.
I think so, yeah. I think it's an important element for the success of the industry. It's hard for this industry to grow and expand beyond just one element of the full cannabis industry. And by vertically integrating as much as possible here in the county, we keep that as much of that industry in the county. We don't have to outsource to other locations. So from my understanding, that is a priority. So. Okay, well, I think that concludes our review of the vision statement. Oh, we have one more hand raised.
I think that's still Bart.
Is that Bart, just for
Still
raising?
Bart, yeah.
Okay, all right, well, I guess we can go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, the presentation of issues and comments from the cannabis workshops.
Andrew, I was wondering if you might want to switch Patrick for issues and concerns so that he doesn't have to attend the whole meeting.
Oh, that is true. Patrick, would you like to
Yeah,
swap
sure.
those out so we don't keep you here too long? I know you've got a lot of important work.
Yeah, I can go first as long as that's fine with everybody else.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. All right, well then I'll start off with just giving a brief overview of how cannabis tax works in Lake County. And I'd also acknowledge Liz Martinez is on the line too from the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, because she is also a key part of this program. So Lake County, we have two different cannabis tax ordinances. We have a cultivation tax, which is a square footage tax, and it's a flat rate depending on the type of cultivating that the operator's doing. Then we also have a cannabis business tax, which we don't have that many businesses enrolled in that yet, but that's a gross receipts tax. So there are some counties where it's all gross receipts or some sort of other flat fee. Lake County is kind of a hybrid because depending on the type of business you're in, governs the type of tax that you're paying. So the cultivation tax has been far and away the bigger tax that we've collected. We've collected, at the last I checked, it was over 16 million in cultivation taxes. We work closely with the Community Development Department. I'm in the administrative office, there's Treasurer Tax Collector and Community Development. And it's sort of a three-way split to get all the necessary data and monitoring for the tax program. A lot of the tax program is using the same material that CDD is already doing. The annual inspections is checking out a lot of what we're interested in from the tax side, because we want to ensure that people are paying for what they're cultivating. And that's been sort of a constant hurdle since I've been here, because each year, permits are coming online during the year. People have done different phasing in. Early on in this, people were phasing in their grow size. Later, people were adjusting each year how much they were going to cultivate. So it's always sort of catch up. And I think it's been really difficult because all county departments have been short-staffed. So getting all the information out there has been tough. What has helped alleviate this is that the board has made some changes to the cultivation tax since 2018. Originally, the tax had to be paid in advance. So when you received your permit, at that time, you also had to pay your tax bill up front. It became clear for a lot of folks that was difficult because they didn't yet have revenue and had probably shelled out a lot of money on their permitting and other measures. So the board over time started pushing that date out. Recently, there's been an even bigger change. Besides just making taxes due after the fact, at the end of the season, the due dates are pushed out even further. So now, for instance, for this year, if anyone is cultivating in 2021, the first tax payment isn't due until January, with the next one being due in May. The other big change is that the cultivation tax had a reduction. So it's a 50% reduction, and that's over the course of 2 years. So I think the big hope is that when the board was making its decision, like a lot of other counties were, and I know this has impacted everything on permitting and licensing, we don't know what the state is going to do. So when we were looking at trying to give local tax relief, for instance, the cultivation tax at the state level was still in existence, and we heard it might go away, but we weren't sure. So the county and the Board of Supervisors tried to initiate some relief. The other relief that's out there for smaller operators is the Cannabis Equity Program. We're just waiting on the final approval from the governor's office. And then a lot of the smaller operators, that remaining tax bill, the 50%, with the 50% reduction, they're able to petition to get that bill paid by the county. So we had a pretty good turnout for the equity grants, and we're hopeful next week or two that we can distribute that and pay those bills for people.
I'm sorry, can you restate that last bit? It's who's paying what bill for who?
So the state has a cannabis equity grant program. Cannabis equity was created through Prop 64. And so as part of the legislation that originally legalized cannabis here to the full extent, they created the equity program and they set aside money. They've actually put extra money into it the last few years. So a lot of local jurisdictions, if you followed, there are all these steps you had to do. You had to do an assessment. We contracted with Humboldt State to do that. You had to create an equity plan. But if you could do all these things, then you were able to request an allocation of funding. So we ended up with about $2 million from the state. And the governor's office wants that to go out in direct aid to cultivators. So we're gonna be able to use that to help new applicants pay their licensing fees, help people cover their tax bills, and also for continuing operations, CDD fees that could be incurred, like an annual inspection fee or monitoring fee, those can be paid as well. But it's up to a cap of 50,000. So given what we have, we're going to use essentially all the money that we have. Will probably be spent by spring or summer of next year. So unless we get more funding from the state, we basically have enough applications to pay out that pot. But so for the next year or two, between the tax relief offered by the board, the cannabis equity funding, we're hoping that can help people that are struggling. Then going forward, those tax dates are kicked further out into the future. So now no one's paying a cultivation tax until the calendar year after they cultivated. That leads to difficulties for us with enforcement, which we're starting to come into, because it was easier when people had to pay in advance. If they didn't pay, we could refer to CDD and shut them down, let's say, or take some other corrective action. Now people cultivate for a whole year before a tax bill is due. So we're starting to struggle with that, and we're just getting a handle on it. But that's a new issue that we have. I don't want to go too deep into the nuts and bolts of other things unless there's questions. Do people have any questions or concerns?
The 16 million that you talked about, is that in the last 4 years since 2018?
Yeah, so that's over the life of the program, but most of the money that's come in, I mean, about half of it was last year. We brought in over 8.5 million for last year. So the first few years, if you add up, I think it was just over 2.1 million. Because there weren't that many operations online. It's really in the last 2 years that a lot of cultivators have come online, that we started to get some other businesses going. So we were trending upwards. We do have people that have opted out of cultivating or reduced their size. The last figures I had from CDD, I think, showed about 3 million square feet maybe going offline for the season. So I'm guessing that's about.
Continue to receive more.
You guys are
deadline. Some of the applications are coming in a little late, but we're trying to work with our cultivators to get that information in and get that information over to you as soon as possible. So.
Yeah, so that would mean, given that even though the overall square footage has increased, and there's also been conversions to mixed light, which has a higher tax rate, we probably would have been looking at similar revenue to what we had last year. except that there's that 50% reduction now. So overall, for the next 2 years, the county's revenue is going to be significantly lower on cannabis tax. But it just depends, even with a reduced rate, if more businesses come online, especially under the, not just cultivation, but some of the other supporting businesses, that would really help the county's tax base.
And we are seeing that. We're seeing new applications, not a whole lot of new applications come in, but those are quite often for, retail sales, manufacturing, and processing.
So what's an example of a supporting business? Like vendors that would support many types of plant growing or not, that kind of thing?
I think what is ancillary, like distribution, retail, manufacturing, processing, anything that's not directly related to cultivation. Lake County is unusual, well, maybe not entirely unusual for the smaller rural counties, but almost for a while there, all of our cannabis tax is coming from cultivation. We had no diversity, whereas if you look at it like in Humboldt, there's a huge amount of retail and other industry that's associated with it. So it's a little dangerous from the revenue perspective to be stacked in this direction, because it's one small piece of an industry that is bringing in most of the tax. So if something happens to that corner of the industry, it's, we feel it completely. We don't have any way to spread that around.
Sure.
But I realize that is changing over time, so that's already a positive.
Okay.
I think one of the things that we didn't talk about was that the taxes changed to canopy only as well.
Change to what, I'm sorry?
Canopy only,
Oh, okay.
Yes.
so if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, that actually means a really huge difference, because when you looked at it, there were sites that previously you're being taxed on cultivation area, which meant, and
You can think of it this way. Cultivation area is like the size of your farm. Canopy is the size of your fields that you're actually growing in. So are you going to be taxed on, let's say if you're growing corn, your cornfields, you're producing the corn, you're getting taxed on the corn with those fields. That's what canopy would be. Whereas if you do cultivation area, it's the barn, it's parking space, it's the entire property. That's
Just total acreage versus the acreage being used.
Yeah, and in square footage actually. So yeah, initially it was set up for canopy area or the total farm. It's changed now to, or I'm sorry, let me say this.
Therein lies the problem.
It was initially set up for cultivation area or the entire farm. Now it's on canopy or just the size of the fields dedicated to the crop.
So actually that led to an even bigger reduction for a lot of sites. But when the board ultimately gave, at the same time they did the 50% reduction, well, just I guess a meeting apart, they changed it to canopy area. So canopy area, I think on average was giving people about a 15% reduction in their tax bill because of that savings. But for some people it was more dramatic. There were examples, I was just pulling up sites where they ended up with a 72% reduction once you factored in the canopy and 50% rate. That was on one extreme. On the other extreme, some people only had a 2 or 3% savings from canopy. So the average was about 15%. So, that really meant that our total tax, most people saw a reduction somewhere around 60% effectively between the canopy and the 50% reduction. So it was a pretty considerable decrease. And I know the board over the next year is going to have to figure out how they want to approach that long term. The extended tax deadlines still exist, but those reductions were temporary. So I don't know what they're going to decide in the long term, and that's going to be something important as we have more data and better understanding. A lot of the questions were related to what was happening at the state level. So something else to think about as you guys go through this process.
Okay, well, are there any questions for Patrick before we let him off the hook, I guess?
I have a couple of questions on Zoom, but you can.
Okay.
Whatever you want to get to.
Maybe let's, Rebecca has one right here.
Very out of the box, but do you happen to know what the average tax bill was?
Ooh, that's tough. I can tell you what the average size of our cultivation was. At least on the tax side, it's a little different for some reasons between them, but acre was around our median. Okay. So a tax bill, most people are looking in the $45,000 range.
You're
But
saying
it's-
that's approximate for that acre?
Well, so if you're an outdoor grow, which most of the smaller grows are, or at least were, and I know more people have converted to mixed light over time, but based off the last billing, most of those smaller operations are outdoor. So I think 45,000, because it's $1 a square foot or $1.05 is probably around the average. But it's really hard because we're skewed here, because we have also, I mean, there's other counties like, let's say Mendocino or Humboldt, where the total farm size is much lower. But there's caps, there's maximums that we don't have here. We're more akin to like a Santa Barbara or Monterey, because we have all these farms that are, several 100,000 square feet or even more. And I know there's projects that are out there that can be higher. So especially in the beginning, most of our revenue was coming from some very large operations. As more and more permits have come through, our average has gone down significantly, and that's no longer the case so much. And that's what led to the board just to exercise some additional caution within the cannabis tax policy. They kept a reserve because there was that concern if some of those bigger operations went offline. If one has a tax bill of $1 million and there's just 20 others that have a $50,000 one, that if that $1 million operation went offline, that would have been huge. Now, because we have over 100 operations that are being taxed, it's not so drastic. There isn't one operation that's responsible for the majority of our revenue anymore.
Quick question. Is any of the tax money earmarked for mitigation for cannabis fields or for like mitigation of illegal farms? I mean, have we set any aside and said, okay, we're taking this money from you guys, but we're going to use it to help you and the community?
So a lot of the revenue, I think one of the biggest allocations, there's the Roadmap Task Force that has up to $1 million designated for it. And I think their heavy focus is on enforcement and cleaning up in the community. There's specific allocations that are set aside that are paying for additional deputies with law enforcement. There's money set aside for code enforcement and environmental health. Part of what we are trying to do is to capitalize on state tax revenue, because the state has made a lot of its money available through grants out of the state tax. So just like we did the Cannabis Equity Grant, we're also able to acquire state tax dollars. The Health and Safety Grant, 500 grand is going to code enforcement. 500 grand is going to the Office of Ed to help with students that have additional needs and provide them support. They also have, the state's made available some of the cannabis tax dollars in the form of a local jurisdiction assistance grant that helps pay for planning costs with an outside contractor. So what's tricky is that I think when the board's looking at spending, we want to be sure that we're spending our local dollars, our local tax revenue on things that the state tax will not also cover. We want to try to grab as much of the state tax funding through grants as we can before we spend our local dollars on that, so that we have them for whatever else we may need.
Can I ask a question, or I gotta wait for all the members?
Go ahead. I think we're
Just a very simple question, Patrick. Same question as Rebecca, but what about the mixed lights? How much we got from the mixed lights? Do we have any mixed lights actually?
We do. So mixed light charges a higher rate. It's $2.05 before the reduction. I don't have the exact figures. I might have them from last year. I think last year we brought in 520,000 or so if you were to look at it from mixed light. But yeah, I'd have to look at the new figures to get an idea.
So 60 million, 500 is nothing. It's a drop. It's not that much, right?
I think the 16 million was for the.
That's the total.
That's the total for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right.
But 8 million was last year.
Yeah, 8.5 million is last year. And the other thing to think about is that most of the larger mixed light operations have only come online in the last year or two. So we don't have extensive tax experience with them. And now that when a lot of them are essentially coming online, it's under this new reduction where people are going to be paying so much later. So that's the other thing too, is that we essentially have a break in revenue because we've kicked these deadlines out into next year. So we haven't seen a lot of what the new operations are doing. We haven't actually felt that tax revenue from them yet.
I guess for about 19 or so pending projects that are in the farmland protection zone that are going to require to be converted from outdoor to indoor, but with, kind of doubling that tax rate, but then at the same time going for, or at least it would kind of break even, so to speak. So they're going from a lower tax rate to a higher tax rate, but then you're halving the taxes on it. So in some ways that might stay the same for a fraction, about 20% of the approved projects out there, less than 20%, so.
I just have one more quick question. Is the way you're collecting the taxes now after the fact, is that similar to how vineyards are paying their taxes, pear farmers? Is that similar to how the agricultural world pays their taxes, or is it different?
It's hard to find an agricultural equivalent to the way cannabis is taxed. I mean, when you look at a county tax, the closest thing, like a county general tax, is probably transient occupancy tax, surprisingly, which is a lodging tax. That's something that's paid after the fact. The other ones, like excise taxes on, I mean, the other things out there, I guess, would be like alcohol, tobacco. You have to look. I think it's hard to look in the ag industry and find something that's similar. You have to go to like tobacco, liquor, other things to try to find models, because most crops are ag exempt. So until vineyards, until that grape is turned into wine, there's not. I don't know that there's something applicable.
In the agricultural community, want to speak to that?
You go ahead first.
Well, as I work in vineyards, but I'm not sitting here as representing ag, but nevertheless, typically, yes, you're right about wineries, right? So if a winery makes wine, sells that product years down the road, I mean, that's a lot of capital tied up in that product, and often the tax isn't paid until much later at that point of sale. But most of the agricultural effort, at least in the vineyard industry that I'm familiar with in Lake County, is grapes being sold to wineries, in which case taxes paid, I believe, at the end of the year when one's taxes are done, or when businesses' taxes are done. Presumably by April 15th or whatever, that bill is paid, or on sometimes a prorated schedule that, depending on how your business is structured, and if you set that kind of thing up with the IRS, as far as I understand it, but don't quote me on that. That said, it's, I think that's fairly common, that the structure is paid annually, and that actually brings me to my question for you, which was, you're saying that for folks now, I understand there's been a shift, but that basically if I'm an operator in the cannabis industry in 2022, that is the year, correct? And so, and the year ends, my taxes will be due in January and then some more in May of next year?
Yes.
Which, tell me if I'm crazy, but that sounds like it kind of falls along the lines of when everybody else pays their taxes. Is it, now you described a...
Except that
go ahead.
ours is not a tax on our actual sales.
Okay.
It's a tax for the right to cultivate.
To do the business. Okay.
Yeah.
Similar to irrigating.
Or similar to, I think Napa and Sonoma County both have a per acre tax on wine grapes.
Okay. I see.
It looks like we have a comment from Catherine Vanderwall, our agricultural commissioner. Maria, do you think you could read that comment? It came up and disappeared. Or let me see if I can pull it up here.
Catherine said that I believe properties with permanent crops, i.e. vine and trees, are charged a growing assessment on their property taxes. And just to let you know, we still have a hand raised with Nara in the Zoom.
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and go to the comments from the Zoom room. I know that, thank you for patiently waiting.
No problem. So a quick answer, I'm not sure who it was who was asking about the environmental cleanup for unlicensed grows, but that is a state money thing. It's part of the tier 3 money. And that was given that this last year, that tier 3 money gets split between law enforcement, education, and environmental cleanup. And they received a $600 million guaranteed baseline for moving forward. So that money is as Patrick said, there from the state and will be available in the exact amount that it was for this year as a guaranteed minimum moving forward, starting with the budget next year. And then a question for Patrick. Thanks for coming today. Has the office looked at all into a gross receipts tax type model for cultivation, or a per pound tax, or something that would be more on the value that leaves the farm as well, or the value that goes to the farmer as a percentage, instead of just the slightly more arbitrary kind of canopy tax yet?
Yeah, I know that the board has asked staff in the future to come back with alternatives, like looking at gross receipts, looking at square footage. I've heard of the per pound tax. I've tended not heard favorable things about the per pound tax, at least at the local level. It seems less typical from what I've seen, but I know we're going to look at everything. Gross receipts, taxes, and square foot. I've spoken to a lot of jurisdictions that have both. I mean, it's always interesting because there are jurisdictions that have gross receipts that I've talked to that want to switch to square footage, because gross receipts is coming up with other issues like auditing. Like if we were to do that, then we would have to add more staff. Right now, tax programs are able to basically piggyback on a lot of CDD's work. If you do gross receipts, treasurer tax collector or another entity in the county would generally have to staff up in order to do audits and inspections and other things. But that's the primary thing that I've heard, is that it's difficult if you don't have all of that in place. You have to put it up. But square footage tax is also concerning, because that's what's led to a lot of the concerns by people where you don't actually have revenue yet, where I know people are having a tax bill come before they've actually sold the product that they've grown, and then they're faced with having to do it. Gross receipts would save you from that. So I think
it also doesn't factor in the market fluctuations that we've seen.
Right.
And that's exactly the other concern. So I think what the board's done right now is that by kicking out deadlines, by dropping from cultivation area to canopy area, doing the reduction, it's essentially buying time to see how kind of shake out and develop some more information. Because we're definitely not the only jurisdiction that's wrestling with how to best do this.
Absolutely. I've talked to a few of them, so I know a lot of folks are trying to consider a way to have it be an economically sustainable model of taxation. So.
Okay, I guess whoever's next.
So have Bart and then Betsy.
Okay, perfect.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I am concerned that at this time, when we've been told by the cannabis industry in the Board of Supervisors meetings that their prices have so plummeted that they face the possible extinction of their industry, that there is so much depending on the revenue from that one industry, while the industry is being grown, while there is pressure to grow the industry, while most county staffing in the sheriff's department, in the county departments is short, understaffed by 25%, and the county is having recruiting problems. The code enforcement is understaffed. It seems to me that there is a disconnect here about the reality of the task at hand of creating an ordinance for an industry that is in such great flux. How is that being accounted for in this task force?
Well, that is an excellent question and a very big one. So at this point, is there any aspect of that that's directly related to Patrick while he's here and taxes?
Yes, I just have one question.
Oh, sorry, Betsy.
Yeah, it's a very simple question.
Okay, go ahead.
very early in the presentation, Mr. Sullivan, you mentioned the maximum grants from the state. The maximum grant is $50,000. Is that per application? That's the amount that can be applied for?
That's at the project level. So basically per use permit. So we have situations where there's multiple applicants. There could be some joint ownership of a project, but it's not that one farm would then be able to have multiple applications. It would be 50,000 in total for that permit or project site.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something else. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Since the Valley Fire, those of us who lost our homes were told that our rebuilding had to be put on a back burner, put on hold to defer to the county being able to focus on building the marijuana industry. There is a very real cost to the county of continuing to focus on the marijuana industry while not adequately supporting the other needs of the county. And I think that it's important that this task force be very clear about that, and that hopefully Mr. Sullivan will keep us posted about the actual ups and downs of the revenues and how they will affect the coffers of the county. To hear that taxes won't be paid for so long that there is no leverage for the tax assessor to address cannabis growing seems very problematic.
Art, I would be very interested to hear more about that offline. I am not aware of any delays for rebuilding, and the planning involvement in processing cannabis permits has not at all stopped any sort of zoning clearances for building permits. So if you have information, I'd be very, please send me an email. Thanks.
Will?
So another quick question for you, and this may be beyond your scope of knowledge, but the other counties in California that have been implementing a similar set of rules for a similar industry, are there other instances where these taxes have been delayed, deferred, or otherwise put off? Is that a common approach to the issue of capital expenditure, fluctuating prices in the market, et cetera? I mean, I don't mean to.
It happened a lot last year locally around the state.
Okay.
It was such that the market crash was so dramatic. And with the state cultivation tax still in place at around 150, last year was like 156 per pound, went up to 161 per pound, when pounds were selling for less than twice that. A number of jurisdictions either stopped their collection or had major decreases. Monterey County decreased theirs for a second time. I know Humboldt County decreased theirs by 85%. It happened everywhere to keep farmers from defaulting last year.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think Nara and Jennifer both have really excellent information on that. I spoke with both of them back at the time because they had done a great job of tracking what other jurisdictions were doing. And I'd say, yeah, there was a wide range. We ended up being probably on the cheaper side of taxes, where I think some jurisdictions hardly did cuts at all, or they had started really high. And so when they came down, it was still pretty hefty what people were being charged. But at least on the North Coast and in our area, I think what our board did was pretty typical of like Sonoma, Mendocino, Humboldt. They all did similar.
Yeah, I think Humboldt would be the most extreme, I would say.
Right.
They took an 85% cut off of a already low price per square foot. Calaveras went down 60%. which took them from $2 to 80 cents.
Okay.
So wide variety. Some have suspended, temporarily suspended their canopy taxes. So there's a wide range within all of that.
And I would just add one other point to the comment earlier about the lack of leverage. There is still leverage. I mean, one, the county has the ability to financially recover. I mean, we can go after people that did not pay their taxes and take legal or administrative action. But another big threat besides actually sort of forcibly recovering the funds is permits are required to have their taxes paid. So anyone that's not paying their tax, even if it's the following year, would be in violation of their term. And treasurer tax collector, I mean, can refer to CDD and let them know that someone hasn't paid. And that in the past has been actually an effective threat that has resulted in or previous bills having been paid simply because you aren't going to be able to operate any longer. And you lose the permit, then you lose your state license, you know, all the work that went into it. It's, for most people, I think that remains a pretty significant threat.
Okay, well, I guess that concludes our discussion on cannabis taxes. I hope everyone has a better understanding of how they work here, and we can keep that in mind moving forward. And Patrick, you know, we'll see how things go. We might invite you back to give an update on something, or
Sure.
If you guys have any other questions, that you can either contact Patrick or you can relay them through me. Patrick's around. He's not here just this one time, but on forever. So.
Thank you, Patrick.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, that moved, or I guess that concludes the taxes, and we can move on to our next item, which is a presentation of issues and comments from the Cannabis Workshop. And Maria, if you could go back a few slides. One more. Yes, we can. Oh, there we go. All right. Now, first, before I get into these issues, I'm also going to read some of the issues that were brought up at the May 24th Board of Supervisor meeting, and that was the first meeting that this task force was proposed. So these are established issues that we need to address on top of the issues that, you know, this is kind of, it's not exhaustive, it's kind of a summary of a lot of repetitive issues we saw brought up in the comments. And as Betsy had mentioned, we have a lot of digital comments that have come through. They haven't been reviewed. And the idea is not to analyze all of these. This is just to give you an idea of what's coming as we move through this ordinance and what are some of the things we need to start thinking about now. So we can kind of, we'll go through this list. We can kind of get a basic idea of what the issues are, but we don't have to come to a solution or any kind of resolution at this time, or we don't even really have to analyze it to any extent. Once we get through some of these lists and this presentation, we can open up for public comment. Anyone can, you know, jump in and add comments or additional items as well. And really, as I mentioned earlier with Betsy, the fine details of each aspect of these issues are going to be brought up one by one as we go section by section of the ordinance as we draft it. So we're going to bring in different aspects. This morning I had a long, well, somewhat of a back and forth dialogue with CAL FIRE and fire protections, and when is that person going to come, or who is our, you know, who's the person on the task force dedicated to that public safety aspect. And, you know, it's not necessarily working like that, but as we get to each public safety issue, we can bring in other people who can come in and provide that kind of insight. So a quick read through of the land use and zoning issues that we had from the May 24th that aren't included on this list. Some of the issues were updating our definitions in the ordinance, our permit application requirements and payment of fees and how those work within our community development department, zoning districts and allowable uses and use, which we're kind of touch upon in this list, permit parcel requirements, setback requirements, incomplete and abandoned applications, modifications, amendments, and change of name and ownership, something that the department has struggled with, temporary use of permits for cannabis events, and insurance and bond requirements for cannabis projects. Those were the land use and zoning issues that initially came up. With the workshops, we had some other issues come up, which is clustering. That's clustering of parcels. When you use, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think the largest cluster we currently have is somewhere around 12 parcels dedicated to one project. Whether or not we should limit that number, or, you could have 12 very small parcels that are much smaller than one very large parcel. So it's kind of, you got to factor that in when you think about these issues. Exclusionary zones. I know this is a pretty hot topic. We've been through a lot of exclusionary zones. I think a lot of people in the community want to see more exclusionary zones. Angela might be out there. She might be concerned about HOAs and POAs and adding them to exclusionary zones. There's a lot of different ways we can approach these exclusionary zones. Hoop house requirements, and not just hoop houses and processing facilities on site. That's something that we've been looking into, and the department has had a few different interpretations over the years, depending on the staff in place. If we can get something more clearly defined that is codified, then it would make everyone's life a bit easier. Micro business eligibility, that goes back to the vertically integrated goal of the industry here. Matching county and state requirements. This is something that I would like all the task force members to keep in mind moving forward. If we can align our ordinance as much as possible with the state requirements and use specific language that allows it to be dynamic and adaptable as the state changes with the right language, our requirements can change with the state, and then customize what we need to customize for Lake County on, as needed, as we go issue by issue. We may want to go a little more restrictive than the state. We can't be less restrictive, but we could be more restrictive. Some other general land use and zoning issues, the amount of acreage, should there be a cap? I think that's going to come up in another slide. Early activation, I think we've already addressed that as a task force. These task force meetings kind of got fast-tracked at the request of the board, mainly to address that one single issue. And next, background checks. That's something that the Board of Supervisors has mentioned. Where do they fit? How the ordinance was established 4 years ago might be a little different now that we've had 4 years of experience with it. And there's also additional issues and concerns when it comes to land use and zoning topics. So like I said, this list is not exhaustive, but we just want to get some of the bigger ideas out there as we move forward. And with that said, we can move on to the next slide. And now we have environmental issues. So I'm going to go back and read through the May 24th list, which focused on hydrology reports and drought management. We're going to get into that here, especially towards the end when it says county designated peer review. Who is reviewing those and how they're reviewing it. Renewable energy and use of generators was a May 24th item, as well as aesthetics and scenic combining districts, tribal cultural resources, soils grading and erosion control, hazardous materials, public lands and recreation, cumulative impacts, the removal of trees, and other CEQA requirements, and at what level we require environmental impact report, and where do the EIRs fit into the process. So for, I think, the department itself, we've kind of geared or guided our applicants towards fitting into that mitigating negative declaration category, because that seems to work for most of them. But some projects are going to exceed that level and could trigger that EIR. For the issues that came up in the workshop, we have groundwater use, setbacks from Clear Lake, forest management, fire safety and defensible spaces, hazardous material use, again, that's a repeat item, drought management, and I think some of the specific comments got into a tiered system for drought management, review of electrical use and plans where they fit in, as well as county designated peer review, such as having a county designated hydrogeologist on, contracted in order to review a lot of the hydrology reports. Another final issue is grading issues, because grading affects a lot of different factors when it comes to the environment. And next slide. Okay, finally we have community related issues. From the May 24th meeting, we had tribal notification and consultation as an issue. And, maybe Robert could speak a little bit to that, to the communication channels that were in place and that could be improved. Exclusion zones and prohibited locations is another community. There's a crossover there between land use and zoning and the community. Odor, noise, code enforcement, building safety standards and life safety, cannabis taxes, which we covered quite a bit today, and environmental grants and traffic and transportation issues. Those were the main topics we brought to the board on May 24th. The workshops expanded upon that and included no commercial cannabis in residential areas. That was a concern that was submitted. Control of odor for outdoor grows. Again, some of these are redundant, but let's go ahead and mention each one. Public notification, cap on the size of cannabis grows, cannabis tax issues, bond requirements, cannabis tourism, minimum cultivation sizes, and staff for monitoring approved projects. Now, again, we could dive into all of these issues. Each one of these could be a whole meeting, and they probably will in the future as we go section by section. So for now, I just wanted to make sure everyone is kind of getting a basic idea. With that said, I think we can open it up for public, or not necessarily public comment, but for discussion among task force members, and then we can open it up to public comments.
I had a question. I had reviewed the comment sheets that were attached to the email that you sent out.
Yes.
But it didn't seem like that was all of them. Is there a way that we could get more of them?
That was one of the things we had, as many of you know, our director, Mary Darby, left, and she had been collecting all of those.
Oh, okay.
I tracked down a box
As
of
many as
her
you could.
records, and we put those together. Again, we incorporated these, but as well as, there's a lot of digital comments that have been submitted. Like Betsy mentioned Holly Harris's comment. It was a 6-page letter. I have a copy of it right here. It covers a lot of really, I guess, specifications about the ordinance itself and questions about it. And I think that is a little bit, we can touch upon that as we get to that special topic for that meeting. Let's see. We have a comment from the Zoom room, but we'll get into that in a second. Let's get the task force members a chance to speak. Jennifer, did you have any questions or comments?
Oh, plenty of comments.
Okay.
But I'd like to know how we're gonna incorporate the community input from these meetings into our structure moving forward, and how are we gonna tackle?
I think, well, we're gonna move forward going into the ordinance on a section by section basis.
Okay.
So, in fact, by the next meeting, we can have a loose, not necessarily agenda, but a timeline of how we're gonna cover each section ahead of time. And I'm gonna work towards getting, professionals, people from the fire district to come in and talk about fire safety, the appropriate individuals, code enforcement, when we get to some of the issues that relate to code enforcement.
And then I guess overall, because hopefully we'll tackle each of these concerns as we get to those topics in the ordinance.
Yes.
Overall, I guess the question is, are we revising or are we writing a whole new ordinance?
We are writing a new ordinance.
Okay.
Article 73.
So
yes.
with that, there are some things that are super time sensitive. Like once again, we've missed the timeline for ag exempt structures as well as temporary dry structures. And is there a way to at least put the things, because this is a long project.
True.
Is there a way to put the things that are time sensitive towards the front so that maybe they could be implemented as a resolution or amendment to what we're working with now, so that we don't end up in a situation like we're in now again?
There is. We can, certain issues such as that, there's already an ordinance in the works that can address some of that. And that can kind of go through the board as a standalone issue that can be passed ahead of time of passing the full article. There are pathways to allow for that.
Fantastic.
That's kind of like early activation. It was time sensitive. The moratorium was up. They needed to address it, so we had to put the general timeline for this task force on hold. Address early activation first. So it was in a lot of ways these meetings were called to order a little ahead of schedule, so that's why we're kind of still working out some of the kinks in our process.
Sure, especially as we see, the state regulations it's a living document, it's constantly changing.
Yes.
And right now, the state, and Nara can probably speak more to this, we've closed the comment period on allowing hoop houses or light deprivation, no light supplementation on an outdoor license. So that's greatly gonna affect, how people
Mhm.
find an outdoor license. So I see like hoop houses probably needing to move to the front, of the discussion, because that's something that's gonna change at the state. And I think that we as a county should be prepared to answer the boatload of questions you're gonna get from farmers about it.
Well,
Yeah, it's a way to save water. So I think,
Absolutely.
as people are looking at that, there may be outdoor farmers that that may even this year decide that they'd like to, throw a temporary hoop up, in order to retain some of the water.
It's a
outside.
25% reduction in water usage.
yeah, absolutely, and there has been progress made on that. Catherine Vanderwall could maybe speak. The Ag Commissioner, our Chief Building Official, myself, and Supervisor Sabatier have met and discussed this issue to pass, standalone ordinance that can allow a pathway for that. Right now, it's, last I heard, it's still in the works. It's not quite finalized, or at least the draft is being circulated for input. You can contact your supervisors to focus on that one issue. But yeah, no, there's definitely that. I mean, for that reason alone, that shows that there is a channel to move to some of these time-sensitive issues.
Fantastic.
So,
And I think that's a good idea. I think that, it'd be silly to have the construct of this get in the way of addressing issues that need addressing. One of the things I understand to be pertinent to that potentially is the input from a fire protection district. And we've alluded to that 2 or 3 times.
that came up over the weekend. We received an email. It started as, an agency comment for a specific project that grew into a larger conversation, and that's where we extended an invitation to come and speak when we get to that topic.
Okay, just
yeah, I mean, we can up our standards in terms of fire safety and wildfire preparation and mitigation.
And definition of what we mean, right? I mean, like, I think,
Exactly.
like hoop houses are hoop houses, but that gets complicated.
It does, yeah. We do have a definition in our ordinance for hoop houses, but, part of it, our discussion that we were having with Catherine, and she's probably hearing this, was our chief building official looked at the definition or the standards for hoop houses that could meet an ag exemption. That's kind of where he was leading the conversation. He was concerned about safety. We need to be very clear on what we mean by a hoop house and the length. He was worried about people. If someone had a heart attack in the middle, how can they get to an exit quickly? What material was it made of? If it collapsed, could it injure someone? It was really safety oriented, and that was his concern. But as long as it can meet those checks and it's a safe structure that can help reduce, like you said, up to 25% of water use, it's something that we should be pursuing.
Sure.
Let's see, are there any hands raised in the Zoom room or any other task force members? Robert, we haven't heard a whole lot from you.
Betsy's had her hand up too. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Robert.
No, as far as I think coming from the tribal perspective of so far what I've seen, notification is big. I see that there is, it looks like there's, I guess, from the grant funding for it, that they're using it to be able to help plan, right, cultivation. And so one of the things that I always notice, it seems like and we're talking EIR, and some of the issues that we're bringing up, but cultural resources are a part of the environment, right? And so usually there's an archaeological study that's done prior to anything happening that's out there. That's being picked up. I'm not sure if that's a part of the funding that they're getting to make sure that, but there's a difference between tribal cultural resources and archaeological resources. And so I think there really needs, because a lot of, especially the community, not realizing and understanding, like, this was just a culturally sensitive area for a very long time. The lake itself is the oldest freshwater lake basically in North America. And there's a lot of history that's here. And anytime that cultivation happens, and that's what really put a dent, I think, in some of the resources that are out there, because early activation, a lot of people was under the misconception that they really got to start digging electrical lines, and start doing what they were doing. And I went out on a lot of site visits where there was a lot of ground disturbance that was already done. And cultural resources are non-renewable. Once you go through them, you don't get them back. And so that's the history of the indigenous peoples that are from here. And so I think to make sure that there are, as far as for the permitting that's set into place, and making sure that we're following CEQA, making sure that, you know, if anything, an archaeological survey is done, that also a tribal cultural resource survey is done. There's 7 tribes that are here within the lake, that, you know, all of them have a cultural resource department. We basically deal with and work with all of the archaeological sites here in Lake County. We have that information, us and basically the state are the only ones who have that. And so that helps us make our determination on what's being done that's out there. So I think one of the things is just to make sure that those things are set into place, or some kind of mechanism is set into place to assess those prior to anything happening. And I think that's a big issue that's really happening with some of the ones that I've gone out and done site visits on. They've already dug electrical lines for their security, done posts, graded roads, did those kind of things, and basically some of those sites were destroyed. Another issue that I wanted to also bring up too is because there's a lot of leasing of the land for the properties that are out there to people who are not owning the land, items that are found, usually the tribes want to make sure that those things are reinterred or reburied in a certain area, and the agreements that we're going in with are actually the ones that are leasing the land and not necessarily the ones that own the land. So this is what we're hoping to fix here, at this platform, is making sure that we have to have the actual property owner a part of this process. Because if any cultural resources are found and they get put back into the ground that are on the property, we need basically approval from the property owner, making sure that those things get put back in there. And so we're dealing with an issue now where we were only, we only had an agreement basically through the cultivator that was leasing the land. And when we tried to go back, and it was like, oh, okay, well, we're done. And they basically stopped shop, closed up shop, took off, left. And now we're holding cultural resources that need to be put back into the ground. And so their response was, that's the owner. Now you have to deal with the owner.
No, that does make sense. I've been involved with some training consultation with you, and yeah, we do tend to go to the applicants for these, but as we've seen a few years in, projects get bought and sold and transferred, and some way to tie it to the owner, the property owner would make more sense.
So I think, as far as coming from a tribal perspective, and even looking at some of the taxes that are being used. Someone discussed earlier about like, are there some of those grant funding monies being allocated to, or being reallocated to make sure that there's someone there to actually enforce some of these requirements that we're asking. I know there's a lot of, because we're out on site a lot, there are a lot of illegal grows that are out there, and they're being fined, and it doesn't make a bit of difference because there's literally nobody going back out there and either requiring them to pay. I think that was my question, is like, how are we requiring people to pay? We're hoping that the ones that basically have the permits are going to comply, but there's a lot of illegal ones that are out there that are continuing to do what they're doing without either paying fines or being accountable for what they're doing. And so I guess that's my concern now, because the county was at that time, basically the response was, well, we don't have enough staffing to be able to go out and regulate this. So, but if we've had this funding available, why haven't we had any funding allocated to that to make sure that?
I think, as Patrick mentioned, some of the roadmap task force is going to code enforcement, and they're addressing that. And also it brings up the scope of the task at hand, which is really focusing on legal cannabis and permitted cannabis. The illegal side is definitely an issue. Anyone in the cannabis industry or in the community who has issues with cannabis, it's the two are there. and they're hard to distinguish from each other, and they have been for quite a while. It's a bigger issue than I think we can solve alone in just this task force, but certainly within the permitting process of the legal cannabis industry, and for all of those pursuing their permits and their licenses, and the procedures that they go through with community development department, especially in terms of tribal cultural resources, we can improve that process, whether it be, you know, notifying you earlier ahead of time. I mean, we are required to send out AB 52 notifications for all these projects. Quite often, we wait for an application to be complete, or at least this is, I can't speak for their, you know, processes that were in place or how previous planners addressed some of these, because I'm looking back at the past and raising, you know, I have a lot of questions myself as far as what happened in CDD before I was there. But generally, once an application is deemed complete, that's when we send out our RFRs and AB 52s. But perhaps we can go straight ahead and get that AB 52 notification out first thing. It's something when we get to that processes and procedures and that timeline of the permitting process, could be a good place to fit something that, or even potentially at the pre-application level. You know, we hold pre-apps with all of our applicants, and we try to stop a project that, you know, red flags show up, it's a dead-end project. We try to identify that and prevent that from moving forward before they even submit an application.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I was just thinking, because Clear Lake is such a unique and cultural rich area, then maybe there needs to be a supplemental archaeological study that's done by a local, you know, there's local review of it that does go into the application process, and we don't just have the environmental and archaeological, and we have something more locally centric at the beginning.
Yeah, something that's maybe zoomed out, because I have heard that these archaeological reports, and I think it was a discussion I had with you, they're analyzing the parcel itself. Well, oftentimes the project parcel or just the cultivation or canopy area itself, due to the fact that I think a fee has to be paid for just the square footage or the size or for each parcel, that they go to a statewide database to receive that information. So you're very zoomed in on the project, whereas, you know, the resources you have a broader perspective. You're zoomed out, you can see the surrounding area and any potential for tribal cultural resources and prehistoric resources. So.
Question for the leased farms. Does the owner have to be involved? It seems like it would be a requirement, because you couldn't attach it to the property taxes if you didn't.
Notarized property ownership approval is required, and we have had pending projects where the owner comes back later and rescinds their approval, and that kind of stops the project. Also, for all of those clustered parcels, they're required to be owned by one owner. So tracking those, that's another issue. I mean, we can go on and on about issues, but you know, keeping track of those clusters, you know, making sure one parcel doesn't get used for another project. We've seen a few applications come in, and we're looking at their APN numbers, and we're like, oh, this is already incorporated in another project. So, you know, identifying that has been an obstacle. So
one of the things I wanted to say too is just making sure that before it gets to an M&D is that through consultation, making sure that any concerns for archaeological or tribal cultural resources are addressed. I mean, legally, that's supposed to happen anyway.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened.
Yeah.
I've noticed there's a lot of M&D filings that, you know, come across my desk that I've never even been at the consultation table to address my concerns. So just, I guess, ensuring that that happens, so, you know, that we don't have to worry about, you know, any inadvertent discoveries that might happen along the way.
I agree, and I think early activation kind of muddied all of that in a lot of ways. So it's glad to see that go.
Yeah.
So let's see, any other comments in the Zoom room, or any concerns, anything anyone wants to add, or maybe something that's up on that list or something I mentioned you have questions about?
He has her hand raised, and then Bart after that.
Okay.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Andrew. I have 2 or 3 questions. The first one's very simple, yes or no. Is the early activation part of this gone completely? Do we no longer have that, yes or no?
The board is in the process of coming to a final determination on that.
But our recommendation was
Our recommendation was to
Yes.
remove early activation from cannabis. The Planning Commission's recommendation was to remove early activation from cannabis, while also allowing a mechanism for dual licensing and permitting with
The
state.
board was ready to rescind the early activation at its last board meeting, but we had not noticed it that way. So they will, we're going to come back and with the public hearing for the ordinance that will rescind it.
That's great. Thank you. So my big concern is the permitting process itself, where the initial study, one question about that has to do with what Mr. Geary was talking about, the AB 52 consultations. Are those required to be done before you actually circulate the initial study for other agencies to comment on? Or is that just a natural component? Why isn't that just part of the initial study circulation to begin with?
Generally, it's done ahead of time. You know, I can attest that we've seen a lot of planners come and go through our department, and some had more or less planning experience. And then this is a unique planning experience in general. You know, planning departments across the country, now they're having to deal with cannabis or struggling with it. You know, I studied planning, I have a passion for planning. Cannabis was new to me when I got here. And it's such a large application process with a lot of documents and a lot of checks. It's pretty intensive from a planning perspective. With that said, you know, the first step is to make sure that it's a complete application. And if the application is missing material, we send it back to the applicant, and then they come back with the required material. That's required material based on both our ordinance and our internal procedures. Next, it goes into the agency and tribal review. That's generally when we send out our request for reviews with local and state agencies, as well as our AB 52 notifications that go out to all the local tribes for each project.
So that's simultaneous with the circulation to the other agencies, correct?
Yes, we send that out. The other agencies, the RFR, have 14 days to respond, although, you know, we certainly work with them if they need more time. And the AB 52 notification is a 30-day process.
So my next, I have two more questions. The specific question I have about the circulation of the initial study is when the question about the hydrological analysis, I'm not understanding why that isn't done by the water resources licensed engineer in the Department of Public Works, rather than the community development department saying we don't have the ability to do that. What's the problem?
Well, it's the application at hand is a land use permit, so it goes through planning. You know, it's a land use project. You're getting a use permit. When we send out agency requests for reviews to agencies, water resources is one of them. And, you know, right now, as of lately, we attach a lot of these documents with that request for review. Whereas in the past, if it's not available, you know, water resources would often, you know, request that material. It also goes to the water board. We get responses and questions, and we work with Janae Pride up at the Regional Water Quality Control Board up in Reading. It is going out to a handful of agencies. We've got a lot of eyes on these projects, not just CDD.
I understand, but I'm specifically concerned because Mrs. Darby said to the Board of Supervisors not too long ago that the Community Development Department does not have the ability to analyze the hydrological reports, and I was under the impression that our very own water resources engineer was hired to have that capacity, and I want to know if I'm wrong on that.
Well, I think what she meant is that, you know, CDD does not have any hydrologists or hydrogeologists on staff. We are not hydrogeologists, but we do send that out to other agencies for their review and for their input. Certain projects that I feel like are sensitive to water, I've kind of gone a little bit further in my analysis. I've requested feedback from water masters for like the Upper Puda Creek watershed for their analysis on the impacts of certain water use aspects. We also have the contract with our consultants in place because our planning staff has been so hard to maintain and keep with this high pressure position. With that, our consultants do, so in a sense, we have, you know, a lot of the discussion was, should we have a designated hydrogeologist that the county goes to? Well, through our contract, they do have a hydrogeologist on staff, and they have been reviewing a lot of the hydrology reports that are submitted. And, you know, I think one thing that maybe was not mentioned in the past is that, you know, that's kind of, the ordinance does require a lot of this hydrological material. So when ordinance 3106 was passed on July 27th last year, specifying a civil engineer, a licensed civil engineer, hydrologist, hydrogeologist to review these and to compile these. It was just one step further of what was already in the ordinance, based on certain feedback and really, I think, in response to the ongoing drought conditions.
So then the next question has to do with at what point the public sees the results of the initial study that is going to go to the Planning Commission. My experience with that process is that the Planning Commission does not review all of the documents in the whole record. They depend upon a staff report that recommends modifications to the conditions to the use permit. Is that still the basic process?
Well, as you can see on the agendas for the Planning Commission, the staff report is the primary document that they review. It's a summary of all the other documents. But the initial study, site plans, property management plans, drought management plans are all included as attachments ahead of the Planning Commission meeting. And the initial study is circulated and open to the public and agencies well before that. So you can kind of get an idea, if you follow Sequinet and Lake County as the lead agency, you can get a pretty good idea of the projects, you know, that are in the works moving their way towards Planning Commission.
Thank you very much.
Any other, do we have any other hands raised?
We had Bart and then Margot. I just wanted you to do a quick time check as well.
Oh, yes, we are probably, we're kind of we're at 94 minutes for our designated 90 minutes. So if we get a few more comments and then we can wrap this up before 3. So is it Bart coming next?
Would be next.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hello Bart.
Yeah, we do have a report of smoke on Mount Canocti. I'm sure that Betsy is monitoring that and others. Roads. For past permits that have been applied for, the issues come up that on roads that are essential evacuation routes for residential areas or just any areas, these are roads that, according to Scott De Leon, were not necessarily built for industrial traffic, and yet the large grows are estimating some of them as many as 40 to 80 truck deliveries needing those roads every day. These are roads without shoulders. These are roads in residential areas where people, families are bike riding and horseback riding. And this is, I think, an unintended, unplanned for consequence that I think needs careful consideration in Lake County because of our special fire risk.
All right, thank you, Bart. That is an excellent topic. We're going to dive into that in more detail and look at the, I guess, all of the data and the numbers that we can compile at this point after seeing a few years of approved and pending projects. Next comment.
Margot has her hand up.
Okay, Margot.
Hi, this is Margot Kembar and Tom Lasik. I just wanted to go back to the Native American archaeological sites and cultural heritage and express the importance to get an independent local view on the impact of these applicants. In our area, we're surrounded by cannabis growers, and my family's been here for quite a while, and we actually have land surveys that were done in the 70s that pointed out where there was some archaeological sites. Yet when the permits were submitted for the applicants that are surrounding us, when it came to archaeological sites, they all claimed that there weren't any. So I don't know who paid for their assessment, but I mean, I can walk up to a couple of them and see where they are. So we know they're there. So I think to the gentleman that expressed the concern earlier, I fully support that, getting some sort of independent view of the situation that the applicants really can't influence by who they hire. Thank you.
Yes, Thank you. That was a great comment. I agree, and we will discuss that in more detail. Yeah, I'm glad it's on the radar. There's a few approaches that I think we have. Do you want to speak to that any further?
Yeah, I mean, because I've actually been back here in Lake County. I used to work in 5 counties prior to this, and the same thing, site protection. And what I've found is that there are a lot of archaeological CRM firms that are doing the work as far as for when they're being asked to come out and survey or give an ARC report, for a particular project. Really not thorough. Some of them are just basically, cut and pasting old ones. And so, a lot of the things that we're doing, I think from a tribal standpoint is making sure, and that's what I was talking about earlier, was like, there's going to be, an archaeological survey, but there should be also a tribal cultural resource survey. And I think, and I can honestly only speak to, because there are, 7, different tribes, only the tribe that I work for, and I know our department capacity, we have all the archaeological sites that are within Lake County. We have a GIS system, so basically it's a mapping system. Anytime that we have a project that pops up, we basically put it in our GIS. Every archaeological site will pop up. That's in the APE or APN, and then surrounding. One of the things I know for us is that we always, consider anything from a half mile to a mile out. Any kind of waterways that either are going through or near are always, indicators for us too. So, there are things that we actually go out there and then say, okay, well, we want to do a site visit. Not only that, combined with the traditional and the cultural knowledge from the elders of the community, we combine that with the scientific and archaeological data that we have from the state. And so, usually, because that history is there of not really doing a good ARC report, a lot of the times we'll literally go out and say we want to do our own site survey, and we usually find something, or find something that either in the report saying that there's no concerns to be evaluated here, there's nothing there, and then I literally been out where I walked up and in the landscaping of the house where the project's at, you got mortars and pestles and all these archaeological artifacts that are littering in the landscape, and here in the report they're saying that there's nothing. And so it's things like that. I'm hoping that even being a part of this, this committee, that we can address to start understanding. And I wish I had my map here just to show you what Lake County looks like archaeologically. It looks like basically it has the measles. There's for every ARC site that's here in Lake County. And so it's just that inundated. And so usually when I do consultations, or even when I'm talking to, whether it's a federal agency, a state agency, it's like so detailed down to the point, tell me what kind of equipment you're using. I want to know whether or not it has tracks or tires. So if it has tracks and it turns, it's going to turn up, turn up the soil. We hear, stories all the time, how much we're finding. Well, we found, thousands of, arrowheads. You still have people, since the water, the drought that we're in, the water has receded. Everyone's going out there looking, and they're there, So that's why I think it's really important to incorporate, the prehistoric that's here. A lot of people don't realize, don't understand that, even though scientifically they're saying that, we've been here anywhere from, I think it's 8,000 to 12,000 years now. There's been a site that's here in Lake County where they found, basically an arrowhead, and they dated it, hydrodated it, dated it back 23,000. So it blows it out of the water, right? But what we thought our timeline was. And so it's those kind of things that here in Lake County is really important. There's a lot of it that's here. There's a lot of it that's been discovered. A lot of it that's undiscovered yet. And so anytime that a shovel or a bucket or anything goes in the ground, I cringe, because there's a good possibility that's something there. So just one of those things to kind of keep in mind, I think. And if we can make sure that those are addressed, I think, as far as part of the permitting process, making sure that maybe that, there needs to be an additional, like I said, tribal code.
We're going to bring it earlier into the process.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because, from my experience, a lot of the projects we're dealing with now have been through multiple planners, and we're just getting initial studies out, and we're just, for the first time, getting, a response from a lot of the tribes, when they should have been responding and aware of it much sooner.
Right. When tribal culture parts of it. Right. And tribal cultural resources has been a part of CEQA since 14. CEQA's been into place since the 70s. But I think as far as tribal cultural resources have been added to that law, it's an environmental law since 2014. So tribal cultural resources are part of the environment. Anything that happens to the environment, that's one of the check off things to make sure that you have for any kind of an EIR or EA. So.
Okay, well, that's, we're definitely gonna dedicate some time to that when we get into the timeline of processing. With that said, Maria, is there anyone else in the Zoom room, or should we wrap up public comment?
Margot's hand came up again.
Okay.
Hi, I have a very quick question. This is administrative. The meeting minutes, will they be posted on the county's cannabis page?
They are going to be posted on the CDD homepage. That is something we've had some questions about in terms of agenda and minutes, and our CDD site has been under some construction and some maintenance. But as minutes are approved, following the approval of the minutes, we will send out a ticket to IT that week to get those minutes up on the CDD homepage under news and information.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
As well as future agendas. So we are working on, I guess, getting the word out a little bit more to the different town halls and different outlets. We're going to work with some people in admin to get these agendas out on the Facebook page and social media. CDD doesn't really manage social media, but we can work with admin a little bit more to make sure that's out. We're going to get the videos of these meetings on YouTube. I think the first meeting is already there, possibly the second meeting as well, and this one will be there shortly as well.
Bart has her hand raised.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. I was going to ask about YouTube. Thank you for addressing that. I look forward to the town halls having access to these meetings so that they can participate in this process. CEQA and cumulative effects. This county dealt with that when we were all seeing multiple applications for Dollar General throughout the county. It was a new concept for many people that, in fact, we need to weigh how one project plus one project plus one project plus one project impacts the whole over time. Already on Puta Creek alone, 17 projects have been permitted and 17 more are in the permitting process. These Puta Creek is part of the watershed for Lake Berryessa and the water supply for the Bay Area. So our waterways have great importance for the whole of Northern California.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really great concept. I've been looking at that since, I guess, November of last year, October, November, when I started to first look into that. It's a tricky issue that we're going to have to face, especially with the county not having a programmatic EIR in place. That's kind of essential information to really have clear-cut guidelines. And, there's pros and cons, not to go into it too much because we're going to go into it in future meetings, and I think we're kind of at our attention capacity at this point. But, yeah, there's a handful of ways that we can deal with that. So we'll leave that to be discussed in future meetings. So with that said, and no other comments or hands raised, then I'm going to go ahead and we can go to the next slide. Oh, the one following that. Public comments, I think we have them all. And finally, meeting is adjourned. So, thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.